Tesla catfishes Nio, Xping, and the other manufacturers of EVs in China is our primary story for today. We also take a look at Chinese consumers and some of the transitions they're making. In one case, we look at a family went from a Bentley to a chauffeur-driven Model 3. So those are our primary story focuses today. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters and those who are subscribers. Your support is greatly appreciated. So what happened is that there's a whole realm of analysis focused on what's going on in China right now with Tesla. As we know, Tesla's numbers have gone up to about 43% market share when it comes to EVs in China based on numbers from, I guess, July at this point. So those were actually really good numbers. It's appropriate for us to start doing regular China updates because what's starting to happen is the production is supposedly at 40,000 vehicles a month out of the Shanghai facility and rising, particularly as the Model Y is approaching. And so both from a production standpoint, it looks like China will eclipse the United States, and from a purchasing standpoint, this will happen as well. So it definitely demands attention. One of the subtexts to this whole thing is what's going on with Xpeng and Nio. So for those of you not familiar with it, China, upon watching Tesla's success and their challenges with pollution, they decided to come up with a fairly long-term plan on pollution reduction. The first part of that was to develop its own EV manufacturers and then protect them. The first phase was they had as many as 500 companies that developed all over China. And the idea was that you have all these domestically developed EV manufacturers who primarily are using Tesla patents to develop their products and be ready to compete in the marketplace. So that was phase one. That also included large amounts of subsidies that reduced the cost of those domestic EVs, so it made them even more competitive than imported EV products. So then what happened is as these production activities started going, the government started inputting large numbers of sort of restrictive rules. For example, license plates that could only be an even or odd number on different days if you're driving an ICE vehicle. Things like it can take as long as 5 years to get a permit to purchase a new ICE vehicle. And then you also have to pay huge fees to get those permits for those ICE vehicles. So it made it very clear through a number of policy techniques that the Chinese government was eager to make progress when it came to EVs spreading throughout the country, and particularly the high-density areas that were sort of pollution-choked. So I actually ran into a PhD gentleman who works on transportation in China, and he shared with me that China, by this EV initiative and renewables, et cetera, had been able to cut pollution by about 25% in that first 4 or 5 year period. The last time I spoke with him was in 2019. So what then happened is that we entered this very interesting phase where the government at this point had spent upwards of $100 billion to help facilitate all of this working properly. And so it was our expectation that what would happen with Tesla is that it would stay in sort of a foreign position where with tariffs and everything, their vehicles would end up staying in that double, even triple the cost of domestically produced vehicles. And so therefore be in China, but maybe not do that great in China because of how few people could afford the price point that the vehicle ended up at from there. So then something very, very interesting happened, and that is that a new idea was introduced by sort of the head of the Chinese government who focuses on this area, and the concept he shared was catfishing. So as you know, what that means is that there was a Norwegian ship captain who found that the highest value for the sardines came when they were alive, when they arrived in port. And the problem people had was when you stored them in large containers in sort of frozen or very cold waters, that those sardines will eventually die. And therefore, once you get to port, in essence, I think it's worth half the amount, but maybe worth even less that versus if those were live when they arrived. So a ship captain came up with the idea, if you dropped a catfish in that holding pen, they found that most of the sardines were so busy trying to stay alive during the process that they actually lived all the way to the port. And I guess it didn't matter that the catfish might eat a few sardines if all the others that remained tended to stay alive in an effort to try to avoid this predator that was dropped into their bin. So Tesla, hence this show name for our catfishing of Nio and Xping today. So where we are now is that we have a situation where, in the case of Nio, instead of the current factory location that Tesla's enjoying building in Shanghai was actually scheduled to be a build facility for Nio. But the government actually instead gave that or leased or sold that space for Tesla to actually do its construction. Now, that Shanghai location is phenomenal, one, for a whole bunch of reasons. Obviously, it has easy access, egress and access to the ports so that raw materials can be shipped in cars out. It's near Shanghai, one of the population centers and sort of high dollar places in the country that can afford the vehicle. So there's a whole bunch of amazing attributes to it. So instead of Nio getting that facility, Tesla got that facility and has been sort of building out rapidly into the space. Now, what's interesting here is there's a number of interesting points to the situation, but what the government then did is force Nio to combine with another government sort of controlled auto company. And so the production for Nio's vehicles is coming through that organization. So how has this worked out? Well, the answer is that vehicles are being produced by Xpeng, Nio, BYD, and others. The pollution reduction is occurring as predicted. Entities like CATL, which is part of the supply chain for Tesla now, are starting to build batteries that are being well regarded especially if they're being used by Tesla. So in general, the plans seem to work. And one of the reasons I've kind of stayed out of anything to do with this is that there are all these logic points on how things work within this universe that completely doesn't make sense to me, but it kind of fits the general program, I think. So, for example, why spend $100 billion to bring Tesla in to catfish and, in essence, wipe out companies that you helped build with that $100 billion? Strange question, but it seems as though the Chinese consumers do have some impact here in that they're voting with their dollar to buy Teslas over other options. And so it's clear that, the powers that be recognize that they can try to compete, but they also have to give the consumers, an opportunity to spend their dollars where they want. And if they choose Tesla, fine. If they choose the domestics, and I say Xpeng and Nio in this catfishing, but there's still a number of other producers who are in the space, but not necessarily well known in the United States. And a couple of three of them may, in fact, in the future, end up doing IPOs or other things. And this also has to consider Polestar and some of the other Volvos, et cetera, of the world, which were bought by Chinese conglomerates that are in operation. So we're now in an interesting zone where we're at 43% market share without the Model Y. Once the domestically produced Model Y comes in, I expect Tesla to jump back up to its 70 to 75% market share that it's experienced in the United States and Europe for people who are serious about wanting a great EV. Now, this is not 100% market share that would have happened maybe 5 years ago, but it's still a significant number that we're dealing with. And so I would say congratulations to Tesla for getting into the marketplace at this time. And congratulations to the consumers of China for recognizing the value proposition that Tesla represents. So we have a viewer of our show, and I'll call him Paul. If you want to look at the last few of our comment section, you'll see his name listed. Paul is based in Shanghai, and we started getting comments from him about what the future of Tesla looked like in China. In particular, he pointed out to us that, look, it's nice that the Model 3 is being built here, but the problem is that Chinese families operate on an extended basis. And so the problem that comes up with this whole process is that extended Chinese families can't afford to mess around with sedans because there are too many generations that have to be moved around in those vehicles. And so there's really an advantage to the SUV in the situation. So he predicted somewhat tepid sales of even the domestically produced Model 3s. And sort of obviously the opposite had happened. A lot of Model 3s have sold, and there's still somewhat of a backlog there, even though production is ramping up rapidly. So what he predicted, and I kind of agree, is that the Model Y is going to be the huge vehicle in China, and it's going to garner a huge amount of sales. The actual finished product number for the Model 3 on the low end is about $42,000 in China, particularly if you have subsidies. But the Model Ys are going in that 55 to 60, maybe even 70K zone. And so it kind of seems like it shouldn't be the higher seller because it's a higher cost. But the problem is that even in areas where folks are very wealthy, it's one parking space. And that brings up kind of a debate that I'm having with him right now, or interesting conversation, which is he has a neighbor who gave up a Bentley, his chauffeur-driven Bentley, in exchange for having his chauffeur drive a Model 3. So I heard this and I was like, my brain was sort of having difficulty with how to process that. Your Model 3, maybe it's a performance at $65,000 versus a $300,000 to $400,000 Bentley that's chauffeur-driven is a huge change. The logic of it kind of makes sense. I thought he might have gone for a bigger car like a Model S at the top end, where the money is not an issue, obviously, but it turns out he chose the Model 3 because he has a child, and when he's not using the car as a chauffeur-driven vehicle, his child actually enjoys driving the car individually. So I thought this was kind of interesting because for a bunch of reasons. One, clearly they could afford to spend more on a domestically produced EV and instead chose the Model 3 and Tesla specifically because of a whole bunch of attributes of performance, et cetera. So it really shows Tesla's power, the power of the brand, and the appreciation of the vehicle within the Chinese market. Number two, it actually kind of makes sense that someone at that level would actually purchase an EV. So as you know, there's been a big change in China where there are all these new rules where if you don't buy an EV, it's very painful. You don't have any restrictions on days a week you can operate. There are all these other government-generated benefits. So I actually thought someone at this level would be able to use money to, in essence, duck the rules that normal people would experience, and they have not done so. And so I think that's pretty impressive. It's also impressive that somebody at that level wouldn't be trying to buy domestic EV as a way to sort of appease the authorities in that process. So in the case of Paul, he actually purchased an EV from Xping, and he indicated it's in the $50,000 to $70,000 range. So in the parking space now, instead of the Bentley within his condo, there's a Model 3 right now, which for me is like, wow, what a change. But clearly, if you have that much money to do a Bentley, you can swap it out after your child has gone to college or something of that ilk. So the question is, what does the future hold in China for Tesla? And I think that when you have sort of the brand recognition and loyalty, the lack of response from competitors, from America or Europe in similarly equipped vehicles with range, etc., the overall suggestion is that China is a beautiful place for Tesla with unlimited amounts of demand and a real pent-up sensibility about the fact that this is a great car that's worth buying. And you've got the network effects of different wealthy families waiting on their turn to buy Model 3s or Teslas versus buying competing vehicles. So this is why our show topic today was Tesla, Catfishes, Xping, and Nio. The fact that Tesla continues to refine range and characteristics of vehicles and models offered, just a large number of ways in which the company is preparing to be successful with autos suggests that there's a really bright China future for Tesla going forward. And we think that China will start outselling the rest of the world if, in fact, the relaxation of some of the EV rules that we were expecting during COVID does not happen. So, again, we look forward to keeping you up to date on what's happening in China. Congratulations to Tesla on how this is working out. And we wanted to jump into our health tips today. Don't forget 25 leg lifts a day to ensure you don't have knee issues. Also wanted to encourage you to consider a 5-2 or another diet in the fasting area. No more than once a week fried foods as a way to prevent type 2 diabetes issues related to that. Also wanted to note that going to bed within 4 hours is ideal because it allows the food to digest and you don't get any acid reflux issues that could lead to cancer. At any rate, we want to thank you once again for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, lehit road, Hebrew, hoda hafez, Farsi, assalamu alaikum, Muslim, hey do, Swedish, Zdravstvuyte, hello in Russian, ni hao ma, hello in Chinese. In Jamaica, we say enough respect, wa goodman. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to your comments. And I want to thank all of you that commented on our last show about Nikola. The fact is that as soon as Tesla has their truck factory in operation, it has a monopoly on high-end truck production and will make a killing. So fear not. I'm a Tesla fan and not a Nikola believer, but Nikola's doing a lot of things right now, like at least doing a groundbreaking on a factory that we're not seeing from Tesla. At any rate, have a great day. We look forward to our next conversation.